My sister mocked my wife's infertility at Christmas dinner, said we'd never understand real family. Everyone just sat there, until my mother stood up, slammed her fork down, and said, "Then tell them who really raised your son." She went deadly pale. I, 34M, watched my sister destroy herself at Christmas dinner. The fork hitting the plate made everyone freeze. Not the gentle clink of silverware during a meal, but the sharp crack of metal on porcelain that cuts through conversation like a gunshot. My mother's hand was still raised, trembling slightly, her face flushed red in a way I'd never seen before. Across the table, my sister had gone completely white. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Christmas dinner at my parents' house had always been tense since my wife and I got married 3 years ago. My sister never approved of her, though she'd never given a concrete reason why. Just vague comments about compatibility, about how we seemed different, about how maybe I'd rushed into things. My wife handled it with grace, always smiling, always polite, even when my sister's barbs got sharper. This year felt different from the moment we walked in. My sister was already there with her husband and their 8-year-old son. The kid was glued to his tablet in the corner, while my brother-in-law nursed a beer and avoided eye contact with everyone. My sister had this energy about her, this coiled tension that made the air feel electric. My wife had been quieter than usual on the drive over. We'd just come from another failed IVF attempt the week before, our third one. The doctor had been gentle but honest about our options moving forward, and the weight of it sat between us like a third passenger in the car. She'd asked if I wanted to skip Christmas this year, but I'd insisted we go. I thought being around family might help. I was wrong. Dinner started normally enough. My father carved the turkey while my mother fussed over side dishes. My brother-in-law complimented the stuffing. My nephew asked if he could be excused to play video games. Standard holiday fare. But I caught my sister watching my wife throughout the meal, this strange look on her face that I couldn't quite read. Satisfaction, maybe, or anticipation. When my mother asked about our plans for the new year, I felt my wife tense beside me. I kept my answer vague, mentioned maybe taking a vacation, doing some home renovations. My sister jumped in immediately, talking about how busy they were with my nephew's activities, how exhausting it was managing a child's schedule, how we couldn't possibly understand until we had kids of our own. The comment hung there for a moment. My wife's hand found mine under the table and squeezed. I squeezed back and changed the subject to my father's golf game. Crisis averted, or so I thought. But my sister wasn't done. She kept circling back to it throughout dinner. Little comments about parenting, about family dynamics, about the joys and challenges of raising children. Each one felt like a small cut, precise and deliberate. My wife's grip on my hand got tighter. Then came dessert. My mother brought out her famous apple pie, and everyone made appreciative noises. My sister launched into a story about my nephew's school play, how proud she was, how nothing compared to watching your own child succeed. She looked directly at my wife and said how sad it must be for people who'd never experienced that kind of fulfillment, that unique bond between parent and child. I felt my jaw clench. My wife's hand was shaking in mine now. I was about to say something when my sister kept going. She said some people just weren't meant to be parents, that maybe it was nature's way of selecting who should raise the next generation. She said that biology had a wisdom to it that we couldn't ignore. The table had gone silent. My father stared at his pie. My brother-in-law looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. My nephew, oblivious, played his game in the corner. My wife stood up quietly, excused herself, and headed toward the bathroom. I watched her go, saw the way her shoulders shook slightly, and something inside me snapped. I turned to my sister and told her that was enough, that she needed to stop. She looked at me with this expression of mock innocence and asked what I meant. She was just making conversation about family life. That's when she said it. The words that would blow everything apart. She said my wife and I would never understand what real family meant. That we could pretend all we wanted, could play house and go through the motions, but we'd never have that authentic connection that comes from creating life together. She said real family was blood, was legacy, was passing something of yourself forward into the future. And some people just weren't capable of that, and maybe we needed to accept it instead of forcing something that clearly wasn't meant to be. The silence that followed was absolute. Even my nephew looked up from his tablet. Then my mother stood. The movement was so sudden that her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She picked up her fork and slammed it down on her plate with that crack that made everyone jump. Her face was crimson, and when she spoke, her voice shook with rage. She told my sister that if she wanted to talk about real family, then maybe she should tell us all who really raised her son. My sister's face drained of color instantly. It was remarkable how fast it happened, like watching ink bleed out of paper. She started to stammer something, but my mother cut her off. My mother said she'd kept this secret for 8 years because she'd been asked to, because she thought it was the right thing to do, but she was done protecting someone who clearly had no concept of what family actually meant. My brother-in-law had frozen with his fork halfway to his mouth. My nephew looked confused, glancing between the adults. My father's face had gone carefully neutral in the way it did when he knew something big was coming. My mother laid it all out. 8 years ago, when my sister had her son, there were complications. Severe postpartum depression that turned into something darker. My sister had disappeared for 6 months, checked herself into a facility out of state, completely unable to cope with motherhood. During that time, my mother had moved in with my brother-in-law and raised my nephew as her own. Bottles and diapers and sleepless nights and all of it, while my sister recovered. When my sister finally came home, they'd all agreed to keep it quiet, to let her reintegrate into her son's life gradually, to protect her from judgment and stigma. My mother had stepped back and let my sister take over as primary caregiver, supported her through therapy, helped her rebuild her confidence as a mother. And now, my mother said, standing there shaking with anger, her voice breaking, here my sister was lecturing others about what real family meant, diminishing someone else's pain while forgetting who had carried her through her own. The silence after my mother finished speaking felt like pressure in my ears. My sister looked like she might be sick. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. My brother-in-law had set down his fork and was staring at the table. My nephew, bless him, seemed to realize something serious was happening and quietly left the room. I found my voice and asked my mother if this was true. She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. She said she'd never wanted to use it against my sister, never wanted to weaponize someone's mental health struggles, but she couldn't sit there and watch her daughter be so cruel to someone dealing with their own pain. My wife had come back from the bathroom and was standing in the doorway. She'd clearly heard everything. Her face was wet with tears, but her expression was unreadable. My sister finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. She said it wasn't fair, that I couldn't understand what it was like, that she'd overcome so much. My mother cut her off again. She said that was exactly the point. My sister had struggled and had been supported through it, and now she was denying that same compassion to others. I stood up and told my sister we were leaving, that she owed my wife an apology, but I wasn't going to hold my breath for it. My wife and I gathered our things while my sister sat there in silence. My brother-in-law tried to say something to me on our way out, but I just shook my head. There was nothing to say. In the car, my wife was quiet for a long time. Then she started laughing. Not hysterical laughter, but genuine amusement. She said she'd never seen my mother like that before, that it was oddly satisfying to watch someone finally stand up to my sister's cruelty. I agreed. For years, I'd watched my sister chip away at people with her comments, always justified as jokes or honest observations. To see her finally face consequences felt overdue. Update 1. The next morning, my phone exploded with messages. My sister had sent a series of texts overnight, starting with anger and defensiveness, progressing through bargaining, and eventually landing on something resembling an apology. She said she'd been stressed lately, that the holidays were hard, that she didn't mean what she said. She asked if we could talk, if we could move past this as a family. I didn't respond immediately. My wife and I spent the morning talking about everything, not just what happened at dinner, but our whole situation. The IVF struggles, the toll it had taken on both of us, the pressure we'd been putting on ourselves. She admitted she'd been dreading Christmas because she knew my sister would make comments, but she'd wanted to try to maintain family peace for my sake. That hit me hard. She'd been enduring my sister's cruelty to make me happy, and I'd been too oblivious to fully recognize it. I finally texted my sister back around noon. I told her that what she said wasn't a result of stress or holiday pressure. It was cruelty, plain and simple. That she deliberately targeted my wife's deepest pain and tried to make herself feel superior in the process. I said her own experience with struggling as a new mother should have made her more compassionate, not less, and the fact that she'd forgotten the help she received said everything about her character. She tried calling immediately. I didn't answer. She sent more texts saying I was being unfair, that I was using her mental health against her, that I was choosing my wife over my own sister. I told her that was exactly what I was doing, and I should have done it years ago. My mother called in the afternoon. She sounded exhausted. She said my father was furious with her for revealing the secret, that my sister had cried all night, that the whole family was in chaos. I asked her if she regretted it. There was a long pause, and then she said no. She said she should have spoken up years ago, that she'd enabled my sister's behavior by always smoothing things over, always asking everyone else to be patient and understanding. She apologized for not protecting my wife sooner. She said she'd seen the comments over the years, the small cruelties, and she'd told herself it wasn't that bad, that it was just sister stuff. Hearing my sister's words at dinner had finally broken through her denial. I told my mother I understood, that I'd done the same thing. We'd all enabled it by treating my sister with kid gloves, always making excuses for her behavior because of what she'd been through. But trauma didn't give someone a free pass to traumatize others. My brother-in-law reached out later that day. He asked if we could meet for coffee, just him and me. I was hesitant but agreed. Update 2. We met the next day at a quiet cafe across town. My brother-in-law looked like he hadn't slept. He ordered coffee he didn't drink and spent the first 10 minutes just staring at it. Then he started talking. He said he'd known my sister's behavior toward my wife was wrong. He'd tried to address it privately multiple times over the years, but my sister always deflected or justified it. He said the postpartum period had been the hardest thing they'd ever been through as a couple, and while my sister had recovered in many ways, something had changed in her. She'd become obsessed with being seen as the perfect mother, he explained. Every decision was about optics, about proving to herself and everyone else that she was capable, that she'd overcome her struggles. My nephew's achievements became her achievements. Every parenting success was proof that she'd beaten her demons. And seeing my wife, someone she perceived as put together and successful, struggle with fertility had triggered something in her. It had become this twisted way for my sister to feel superior, to convince herself that she was winning at something. He said he'd told my sister she needed therapy to address it, but she'd refused. She insisted she was fine, that everyone was too sensitive. I asked him why he'd stayed silent at dinner. He said he was ashamed, but he'd been conditioned over years to avoid confrontation with my sister. Any pushback would lead to days of cold silence or explosive arguments. It had been easier to let things slide, to make excuses, to pretend the problems weren't that serious. He said watching my mother explode had been cathartic in a terrible way. He said he'd actually felt relieved that someone had finally said what needed to be said, even as he felt guilty for not being the one to say it. I asked him about my nephew, how much he understood. My brother-in-law said they'd had a conversation that morning. They'd told him in age-appropriate terms that Grandma had helped take care of him when he was a baby because Mommy had been sick. My nephew had apparently been fine with it, had just asked if Grandma could teach him to make her cookies. Kids were resilient like that. Before we parted, my brother-in-law asked if there was any path to reconciliation. I told him honestly that I didn't know, that my wife's well-being was my priority, and if having my sister in our lives meant continued toxicity, then the choice was clear. He nodded and said he understood. He said he hoped my sister would get the help she needed, but he wasn't optimistic. Over the next few days, my wife and I had long conversations about what we wanted going forward, not just regarding my family, but regarding our own future. The IVF had consumed so much of our lives, had become this crushing weight that colored everything. We decided to take a break from treatments, to focus on each other, to remember why we'd gotten married in the first place. We also talked about other options, adoption, fostering, or just building a life that didn't center on children. For the first time in years, those conversations didn't feel like giving up. They felt like opening doors instead of closing them. My sister sent a formal apology letter a week later. It was clearly written with therapeutic guidance, hitting all the right notes about taking responsibility and acknowledging harm. But it felt hollow somehow, performative. My wife read it and said she appreciated the effort but wasn't ready to engage. I respected that. My parents invited us to a belated Christmas celebration, just the four of us. My mother had apparently told my father that my sister wouldn't be welcome at family gatherings until she'd done serious work on herself and made genuine amends. My father, surprisingly, had backed her up. Apparently, Watching his daughter's cruelty toward his daughter-in-law had shifted something in him too. That dinner was quiet but warm. We exchanged gifts, ate too much food, and didn't talk about the drama. My mother pulled my wife aside at one point, and I saw them hugging for a long time. Later, my wife told me my mother had apologized again, had promised to be better, to be more aware. They'd cried together and started building a connection that had been sabotaged for years. Update 3. It's been 3 months now since that Christmas dinner. The family dynamics have fundamentally shifted in ways I'm still processing. My sister started therapy, according to my mother. Real therapy, not just crisis management. My brother-in-law reports that she's actually engaging with it, working through the trauma and insecurity that drove her behavior. Whether it's genuine growth or just going through the motions remains to be seen. She's asked to meet with my wife and me several times. We've declined so far. My wife says she might be open to it eventually, but she needs more time, needs to see sustained change rather than just promises. I support whatever she decides. The interesting thing is that I don't miss my sister. That realization hit me hard one day. I'd spent years making excuses for her, convincing myself that family meant accepting people's flaws. But removing her toxicity from our lives has been like taking off shoes that were too tight. I didn't realize how much pain I was in until it stopped. My relationship with my parents has actually improved. My mother seems lighter somehow, no longer carrying the burden of family peacekeeper. She and my wife have gotten genuinely close, doing lunch dates and sending each other random texts throughout the day. My father has been making an effort too, asking about our lives, actually listening to the answers. My nephew came to visit us last month, just him and my brother-in-law. The kid is great when he's not being used as a prop for my sister's insecurities. We took him to a science museum and got ice cream, and he had a blast. My brother-in-law thanked us for not cutting him out, said he was worried we'd want nothing to do with any of them. As for my wife and me, we're doing better than we have in years. We've redirected the energy we were spending on treatments into other things, traveling, picking up old hobbies, investing in our relationship. We've talked about adoption, but haven't made any concrete decisions. The pressure is gone, and that absence has been healing in itself. The irony isn't lost on me. My sister tried to use our infertility to diminish us, to prove her superiority, and instead she exposed her own fragility and gave us the push we needed to reevaluate what matters. Her cruelty became the catalyst for positive change in our lives, while destroying the image she'd built for herself. Sometimes I think about that moment when my mother's fork hit the plate, that sharp crack that cut through years of enabling and silence. How 1 second of raw honesty unraveled so many careful lies. How sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to keep someone else's secrets when they're using them as weapons. I don't know if my sister and I will ever have a real relationship again. Part of me hopes she does the work and becomes genuinely better, for her own sake and for my nephew's. But another part of me has accepted that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. And maybe that's okay. My wife asked me last night if I regretted how everything unfolded. I told her the only thing I regretted was not standing up to my sister sooner, not protecting her from years of small cruelties that added up to real damage. But the explosion at Christmas, the aftermath, the changes it forced, no, I didn't regret that. She smiled and said she didn't either. That sometimes things need to break completely before they can be built better. We're building better now, she and I. And that's what real family looks like.